Okay, so it's July what's the day? The 6th, right? July the 6th, so we're making up for the lack of Friday's lecture. So whatever day that was. Um, School I'm at right now is closed down. We're lucky enough to get in here an extra day. Um, or at least a day early. So what we're going to cover in this lecture, we are going to bridge the gap between Descartes, his meditations in the Enquiry. At least historically, we're going to talk about the significance that Descartes' meditations had, and how this eventually leads to like calculus and stuff like this. And then we're going to talk about David Hume and sort of empiricism's defeat of rationalism in some sense, and the birth of a view we call psychologism. Yeah. I mean, maybe not the birth per se, but in terms of like general science and philosophy, this is the most important moment for psychologism. Yeah, David Hume's Enquiry. Yeah. Okay, so what's going on with Descartes? So remember that the church they're freaking out. Do you remember why they're freaking out before Descartes? What's going on? Yeah, the scientific revolution, right? And the scientific revolution is giving us what we call our new physics, right? So instead of us doing what we do because we have some sort of telos or some sort of essential property in us, some sort of potential, right? We do what we do only because we are a bunch of particles that are in motion, and these things move not because of some sort of essence to the particles, but because all of these particles are caught in a string of cause and effect. Yeah. And why was this a problem? So our old science, our Aristotelian science, our common sense science, our medieval church science, you could call it, right? What was wrong with this? Why was this view so scary?
I don't know, but I know that the big fear was that the Earth is the center of the universe.
Right. Well, that was one of the things. So, like, the Earth was the center of the universe, and why did we think that back in the day? Well, we thought so because Earth is heavy, right? But because of Copernicus and a bunch of Belgians and a couple French dudes, right? We know that's not the case, right? So this is one of the reasons why we leave this old physics.
The common sense.
Yeah, we leave the common sense view because what we're observing is not common sense, right? It doesn't fit into this Aristotelian empiricism. Yeah, and so, right, let's move past the sort of Aristotelian stuff and let's understand that the new science, the new physics, it's literally just, instead of expressing how the world is in terms of essential properties like heavy and stuff like this, we describe the world in terms of numbers, in terms of math. And this gives it, why do we switch? Well, we switch because this new physical language, this new physics, it gives us the power to predict the future. And if we can predict the future, right? If everything is just cause and effect, I mean, if everything is just particles in motion, and these things are in motion not because of, some heavenly spirit inside of them, some sort of essence that they have, right? But merely because some particles are causing others to do these things, right? So if that's the case, and I can continuously, right, predict the future based off of this new language about physics, then we have to switch the language. We have to adopt this scientifically superior language, right? But the problem here is that what? That everything seems to be determined physically. No more potentiality, right? So like I'm physical, I'm a physical dude, right? I'm a fact, yeah? And if everything about me, if all of my behaviors are caught up in this determined string of cause and effect, yeah, then there's no such thing as telos. There's no such thing as, well, I don't want to say there's no such thing. I'm being a little too reductive. If you're a Calvinist, you probably think this with the conjunction of a telos, right? But historically, old Calvinism stuff's kind of on its way, right? Yeah, I mean, to think that you have a potential and that you're good or bad based off of your fulfilling of your potential, it doesn't make any sense. Why? Because you're not in control over whether or not you fulfill that potential. In fact, you don't have the potential to do anything other than what the particles have determined you to do. You have no freedom, right? You have zero freedom if this is the case. If everything is just particles in motion, free will is an illusion. Okay? At least that's the scare right now. And I would say most people today still, most philosophers still believe this. The good bulk of our sciences are still assuming this notion, right? But then we somehow pop back out to ethics and all this other stuff, right? It shouldn't make sense. There are niche philosophical views that somehow try to make sense of it, but like I said, they're niche, right? And if any philosophers are listening to this, right, I'm going to double down on that idea that it's niche, right? Yeah, and so what do we lose? Well, we lose everything about us. We lose our identity, right? So no more telos, no more identity. We lose our notion of good and bad. So we lose our ethics, right? What else do we lose? We lose knowledge because I'm not free to evaluate evidence. My beliefs are determined for me. They're not as a result of careful searching through the evidence freely. All my beliefs are determined for me, and they're not determined from the evidence. They're determined by physics. Shit, right? And so what does Descartes do? Well, Descartes ends up so remember like the last couple seconds of the last video, when Descartes gives this sort of wax argument. Descartes gives us a separation between the mind and the body. This is what we call metaphysical dualism. Why do you think it's called dualism?
There's two things going on.
Yeah, there's two things. You are two substances. You are a mind or spirit, right? And you are a body. Now, there's a massive philosophical problem here, and what do you think that is? There's a Norm Macdonald joke about it. About a problem. It's going to be called the mind-body problem. And Norm Macdonald makes a joke about it. He refers to a joke his dad made about it. So think about so Norm Macdonald's at the fair with his dad. Do you remember this? Norm Macdonald. So the only person in the class today is Freddie, because we got to film in a hurry, and I didn't have time to reach out to Scotty and Steven, right? But yeah. So Norm McDonald he's at the fair, like a county fair or something like that, and he's walking with his dad, and he points to the haunted house,
Oh, that's right.
and he goes, so correct me if I'm saying this wrong. His dad, he asked his dad, I want to go in there, I want to go see some ghosts. And his dad goes, well, there's no ghost in there. And he goes, why not? He's like, how do you know? He goes, well, look at those wheels under the haunted house. If there were ghosts in there, when they drive off, all the ghosts would fall out, right? There'd be no way for the ghost to stay inside the haunted house while the haunted house is still driving. And what do you think that would have to do with a mind-body problem here? What do you think that mind-body problem means?
Well, if your mind were separate from your body, you'd be wrong.
100%. If my mind is separate from my body, well, how do they have a causal relationship between the two? How can my body cause my mind to do things? And how can my mind cause my body to do things when they are of two different substances? Right? So my mind preserves this idea of an identity, of a potential, right? Of freedom from the physical world. Yeah. But we get a new problem. And that problem is, well, the mind-body problem. How do they interact with each other? And just because there's a problem, and just because we don't have an answer for that problem, that doesn't mean that it's wrong. So just because we don't know a thing, doesn't mean that the mind-body distinction is wrong. And just because we can't solve the mind-body problem doesn't mean that dualism isn't wrong, right? But it is a problem, right? Maybe if we can't solve this problem, then maybe we're not justified in believing the truth, right? But that's something for you guys to look at personally. And if you really like this kind of idea, then keep studying philosophy. Yeah. Right. So Descartes brings us back, right? And so now the church ends up being kind of pacified throughout these 6 meditations, right? So what besides the mind-body distinction, besides metaphysical dualism, what does Descartes do? Well, Descartes lays down a foundation of knowledge in general. Through reason alone, Descartes proves that he exists. So he doesn't provide physical evidence that he exists. He says you can't do that. You can't provide physical evidence for the idea that physical things exist.
Yeah.
You can't provide physical evidence for the notion that you're not in a physical illusion. Yeah? We can't trust our senses. Knowledge on this fundamental level cannot be obtained through forensic evidence. It has to be obtained through reason alone. And so in this proving, so if you guys remember that how to write a paper stuff I uploaded last week, you guys should check that out. Through this notion of proof, a priori, so before experience, Descartes proves that he exists. He proves that he has a mind. So after meditation 2, okay, so I'm just going to start like grossly saying all the stuff he eventually proves. Okay, he proves that God has to exist. He proves through reason alone. He proves, not a joke. He literally gives a kind of proof that God has to exist, that we have to have physical bodies, and then he provides evidence he provides continued proof. So from one meditation building on next all the way through 6, Yeah, he proves that, yeah, that other people have to have bodies too. That from this one, I think, therefore I am, all of these things, Rene Descartes contends, have to be true as well. So if it's true that I am a thinking thing, that I exist as a thinking thing, then God has to be real, my physical body has to be real, and all the other all and that other minds exist as well. So shoot, right? This is a big deal. Okay. So in this move from our old physics to this new one, we get a lot of fear that everything we think about ourselves has been a farce. It hasn't been real at all, and that knowledge is something that can't truly be obtained. Right? Rene Descartes comes in and gives us reason to think the opposite. That actually this new rational language called mathematics, this actually kind of makes us like epistemic giants now. That now we're like on epistemic steroids now. He goes, hold on, right? I know you guys are freaking out. It seems like we're in a really sad, godless, material world, but that's not true at all. In fact, we should embrace this new method of acquiring knowledge of the facts. We should embrace this rational science. And yeah, Descartes officially starts what we call the modern period. So we went from Aristotle, Plato, and all those dudes. That's the ancient period. Then we go to the medievals, right? Which we didn't read any. We will read in the next couple weeks. Oh, we're going to read some medieval philosophy this week, I think. Right. This is just an extension of the ancient period, and now we're in the modern period, right? With our new modern science. Yeah. Okay. So what comes after all this? So Descartes solidifies an entire time period. Yeah, he puts an end to the classical period, the medieval period, births us the modern period, and what comes next? Well, with this new methodology of knowledge, this new science, we have not only do we have a much better understanding of how things will be in the future, right? No real need to use potentiality when we talk about the physical world, yeah? But we have an onslaught of logical proof for God's existence. We have an onslaught of modern proving of God's existence. And we have to remember that if our logical languages, our mathematical languages, our logical calculus languages, right? If these things are telling us the future, well, yeah, they do. They would tell us the past as well, right? I mean, in some logical proofs for God, right? There are some proofs that go backwards, right? And we're going to read some of those in this class with Aquinas in a way. Yeah, this math can tell me how the actual world is going to be in the future, when I take these kind of formula, these kind of languages, and I can prove the existence of God just like I prove the states of affair in the future. I mean, what does that look like? If I can have certainty, or what appears to be certainty about the future with this new language, and this language is also telling me that it's necessary that God exists, I mean, are you just free to pick and choose? Are you free to pick and choose what the languages tell us? Doesn't it seem like that if this new physics is telling me the future, then it's also telling me for certainty, right? That God has to be real as well. I mean, that's the attitude going around. That instead of just like philosophical stipulation, right? We have our logical languages being supercharged epistemically. And now all these old arguments for God's existence are getting formalized in a new way, not English, right? Yeah. I mean, it's making people feel pretty gosh dang, um, confident in the notion of reason. That I can rationally prove all these things that I intuitively feel about the world.
What if two things contradict each other? Like one person could
Yeah, so these sorts of things. Well, that's kind of too much of a deep question, because there are these modern philosophers are coming up with different kind of conclusions of the content of what it means to be God, right? For all you math people, right? When two proofs don't get along within their own content, we assume that, well, one of you guys have the wrong content within your language, right? But like you assume something on a postulate level, on an axiomatic level, right? That shouldn't actually be assumed as true, right? But that's a really complicated talk. If you guys are interested in that, in what sort of proofs count as good proof, how do you evaluate proof in general, right? Then take take an intro to logic class, and then from there, right, you'll take a higher order logic class. Yeah. But the bee's knees of this new way of thinking, this putting reason above everything else in terms of knowledge, is giving us proofs for God's existence, as well as us determining the future scientifically. Yeah. Like, I know when these things are going to hit the ground, before they hit the ground, right? That's freaking crazy, right? So you have guys like, so this takes off, right? And then you have guys like Leibniz, Gottfried Leibniz, and Isaac Newton. Yeah, they end up developing these languages fully, right? And we get the birth of calculus. So calculus gets birthed by Newton and Leibniz about 40 some odd years after Descartes' Meditations. Yeah, 45-ish or something for Newton. Yeah, in fact, both of these guys are like theologians. Both of these guys are theologians, right? So stupid, dude. Both of these guys are theologians. So stupid, dude.
Sorry about that.
I want to pause this video now. Yeah, and God dang it, Eddie. Huh? I gotta pause this. Hold up. Stupid. Okay, so back in action. All right. So Descartes gives us, he makes sense of this whole thing, right? Of all the scares that we have by pointing out that reason is actually, right? Reason is how we know all the good stuff we thought before in our old physics, right? And because of these meditations, guys like Leibniz and Newton, they come out and they flesh these formal logical languages out. They fleshed it out with us with the idea that reason bears us this knowledge about the facts, right? Leibniz and Newton, they both give two different versions of what we would call calculus. The one you actually learn in school is the Leibniz version, right? But the one you hear about most of the time in history is actually the Newtonian version of calculus, right? And so this is do you know the name of Newton's like treatise on gravity? He finally put the formula to this whole
X plus B crap, right?
So no. The title of the book, do you remember? Yeah, it's called The Mathematical. Yeah, Newtonianism. He's actually most of you guys. I mean, we worship Isaac Newton like crazy, but most people who are watching this video would probably think the guy's a nut if they met him. Yeah. He's not a Catholic. He's like a weird Protestant sort of thing, right? He's an alchemist. Um, yeah, he's a crazy guy. I mean, no, not for being a Protestant. That's not crazy, but like, he's not really a Protestant either. The alchemy part is what we think is crazy, right?
What's alchemy?
Alchemy is it's a medieval kind of science where you take some substance and you do like you change its essence into something else. It usually like if you've seen like the anime Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh.
Like you see like the little like not pentagram but like stuff like this, right? And the signs and they put it. Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to actually explain what alchemy is. Um, in fact, Brotherhood, not Brotherhood, Full Metal Alchemist, their world is the parallel version of our world where instead of our Newtonian science taking off, which is actually funny because Newton's an alchemist, but alchemy actually wins over. But yeah, I mean, yeah, Newton's treatise on gravity is called Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. I'll say it again. Mathematical principles of natural philosophy. Right. And man, at this point in time, we are sitting really pretty. We're sitting really pretty in terms of what we think we can know. We're like epistemic gods ourselves. We can freaking predict the future, and we can know that God exists without ever having to see God. Why? Because, well, guess what? We can prove it with a kind of calculus that God exists. And that's still how it is today, right? There are still guys who continue to use our formal languages to prove that God is real. And guess what? They're actually given proof in a literal sense of the word. Proof. Right? Okay. So this continues for a bit. This continues until well, I mean, it continues today. There are still, the rationalist tradition is still alive, big time. We still do physics in this rationalist way. We are still doing physics in this rationalist way. The whole quantum phenomena we're observing, they're pushing our language to its limit in the same way. The phenomena that Galileo was pointing out was pushing our old language to its limits. Our math is being pushed to its limits with quantum physics. So much so you have to the amount of math that you have to use to even have a good conversation about quantum mechanics is to the point where, man, almost no one on the face of the earth can really have a conversation with you. That's how pushed to the limit the language is. Mm-hmm. In fact, we're actually going back a little bit to an Aristotelian assumption about telos, because, well, things don't seem to be as determined as they are. So Aristotelian science may, within the next some odd years, make a full recovery. Really funny. Yes, really crazy.
Retro.
Yes, it's super retro. Wow, classic. Such classic. Okay. So David Hume comes out.
Mr. Hume.
Mr. Hume. He's kind of looked at as a villain, right? At least to those who think that knowledge is real, that knowledge is possible. David Hume is going to come, and he's going to so if any kids can hear this, right, shut me off for a second. Yeah, he's going to come and take a shit on everything we think that we know. And he's going to give really good argument, ironically enough, for the idea that our arguments about the world give us no knowledge. That, even when we have true belief, that notion of justification doesn't exist. And how's he going to do this? Well, he's going to take all this math stuff and he's going to remind us of that weird question that I asked him at the beginning of the semester. Oh, so you think that these formula are telling you about the world? Okay, so then why don't I ever see the formula in the world? Right, and then there should be like that lobotomy, like drooling, right? Yeah. And he's actually going to say that this math stuff is actually more about your psychology. It's going to be more about your perception than it is going to be about the world in itself. And right, that's going to suck for us. Here we go, right? It's going to be he's going to shit on us. Okay. So I am going to go through those questions that I uploaded last week, and I'm going to use them as talking points, and I'm going to lecture through. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to try to get to this kind of quick. Right. All right. So this is going to be section 1 from the Enquiry, right? Let's see here. Ignore the questions need to be answered before class types, yada, 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 right? This is for another class, not you guys. This stuff right here, this is just like voluntary. Yeah, you don't need to go through this and turn it and like actually do it, but if you're watching this, I recommend you pull this up. Yeah. Let's see here. So here's some things to keep in mind. So remember the difference between induction and deduction. So induction This is reasoning from evidence to principled conclusion. So this is when all my premises are true, then my conclusion is only likely to be true. So we're going to get into that in a second. And then there's deductive reasoning. And this is when all my premises are true, then my conclusion has to be true. Yeah. So an example of
premises are true. So both say the premises are true. Then
yeah. So here's so here we go. Here's an example of induction. The sun has risen every day so far. That's P1. Conclusion, the sun will rise tomorrow. So this is inductive, even though it seems like, this is true, like no matter what, the sun's going to rise tomorrow. It's still that just because this is true doesn't necessitate that the conclusion is true. In fact, I can easily imagine. So remember that how to write a philosophy paper lecture I gave. Yeah. I can imagine this being true and this being false. It's really easy, right? Just imagine you live in freaking Alaska, right? Here's an example of a deduct. Oh, so here's another one, right? All crows I've ever seen are black. That's my first premise. And then my conclusion from this, all crows are black. Yeah, if this is true, is it still possible for me to imagine my conclusion false at the same time? Hell yeah, all I gotta do is imagine a white crow. All right, but you guys should notice that all of these premises are premises from observation. Mm-hmm. These are all premises from forensic evidence you've collected. How do you know that the sun has risen every day so far? Well, you've seen it. All crows you've ever seen are black. How do you know that? Well, I mean, it's in the premise itself, right? You saw them. Yeah? But do you see all crows are black? No. Crow, yeah. Do you see the sun rise tomorrow? No, right? Okay, so here's some deduction. So if you are a mammal, then you have a backbone. Eddie is a mammal. Conclusion, Eddie has a backbone. Now, we have two premises, one conclusion. If you are a mammal, then you have a backbone. Eddie is a mammal. Conclusion, Eddie has a backbone. Now, to determine if something is deductive, we don't look at if they're actually true, we just look at the structure of the argument. So like if it were true that you had to have a backbone to be a mammal, and Eddie was a mammal, can you imagine these two being true and the conclusion somehow being false. No, you can't imagine it. That would be a logical contradiction. And we don't suppose that logical contradictions exist.
But those two would have to be true before the final.
No.
Bibles would have to have backbones, and I would
Yes. For this to be a correct deduction, yeah.
Okay.
But for it to be a deduction in general, it's got to take this sort of certain structure.
Okay.
So induction is all evidence based, and it's never giving certainty. Deduction is giving this certainty through the structure alone, not through evidence, but through rational structure. It is giving you logical truth, not observational truth, not evidence truth, but logical truth. Yeah. Okay, so let's remember this. Okay. This is the heart of rationalism, that you can know for certain how things are going to be. That's why these proofs for God work, because I think that I can give you logical truths and that they tell me something about the world. Okay, so let's see here. So Hume is going to explore, so to take a complete dump on this whole deduction scheme, that I can, through reason alone, without evidence, he's going to say, well, let's look at the limits of what our mind can know. Yeah? Hume is going to explore the limits of an epistemological position known as empiricism. Empiricism in this context holds that all knowledge of the world comes from experience. This is not what our last philosopher Descartes believed. Descartes' epistemological position is called rationalism, which holds that at least some knowledge about the world is obtainable through the mind or reason alone. Pay attention to the difference between the two, as it is one of Hume's aims to explain rationalism away. Hume is going to try to kill rationalism. Well, Hume is what we would call an atheist. Hume is an atheist. He doesn't think that we're justified to believe in God just because we can prove it, just because logic tells us that it's so. And if that's the case, well, then what does that do for all the new science we have? It's also got to be a matter of lunacy. Now, Hume does not hate science.
Yeah, what's his goal?
Hume, his goal is to obtain the truth of the matter.
So he just doesn't think it's true.
He just doesn't think it's true. He goes, okay, all this new science sounds good, but look at all the other crazy stuff it's bringing us. Like certainty that God exists, even though you've never seen God. Proof sounds pretty cool. Remember, just picture all of us in the modern period, right? Being so cocky about all the stuff we know and this and that.
LeBron James, best player ever.
Yes, 100%. Right? Isaac Newton's just like crossing people and stuff. Right? Leibniz is giving with certainty. He's affirming Protestant belief with certainty. He's affirming Catholic belief with certainty. Right? Okay. David Hume goes, okay, hold on. You really think that this is going to count as evidence? Yeah? Okay, so question 1. So this is from section 1. Hume describes two sets of moral philosophers. What are the two kinds, and why does the second detest the first? So if you guys go in there, man, this is a really good question for a midterm. If you go in there, right, and you find the words disgraceful and foundation, and you read until the next paragraph, you're going to find the next answer. Are you going to find that answer? There's going to be, I should save this one. Right. Yes, I should save this one. There's going to be the obtuse philosophers, or the abstract philosophy, and then there's going to be the sort of like, let's just call it the easy philosophy. right? There's going to be philosophy that is geared towards the truth. And then there's going to be philosophy, just like in this question too, there's going to be philosophy that is done to affirm what we already believed. And he's going to say that this kind of rationalist philosophy is going to be just affirming what we've already believed. He's going to not like this kind of philosophy, right? And so, who do you think he's talking about? So, Hume, he's making a distinction between the philosophers that are actually trying to get to the truth and the philosophers that just philosophize to affirm what they believed before they ever did philosophy. So, who do you think he's talking about? So there's philosophers. These are the two kinds, right? There's going to be the philosophers that are trying to get to the truth. They're going to be doing really rigorous work. And then there are philosophers that are putting in some work, but their idea is not going to be about the truth.
It's going to be about their agenda.
It's going to be about their sentiments.
So you're talking about like people from the church.
Yes, and who is that? Yeah, well, Copernicus, we're not really going to call him a philosopher. We'll call him a natural philosopher, I guess.
But Calvin.
Yes, guys like
John Calvin.
Yes, John Calvin's going to be in there. I mean, John Calvin's.
Martin Luther? Or was that after?
Yes, so not just figures in the church, not theologians. I'm talking about just philosophers. So not just the pure theologians.
Okay.
I know the philosophers. What philosophers are we talking about here?
Well, you said
guys like, what did Descartes do? Descartes pacified our beliefs by building a worldview that fit what we did before, that fit what we believed about ourselves before, that I have a purpose and an essence, and I can choose to do something or choose not to do a thing, and that I can choose to evaluate evidence objectively without being forced into my beliefs through physical cause and effect, right? That I can know the future before it happens through this new science language called math. He's talking about guys like Descartes and guys like Leibniz and guys like Newton, guys who are building these deductive formal systems, right? Like predicate calculus, right? We're proving God. And David Hume is saying, well, are you really being honest here? Or are you just philosophizing for the sake of, yeah, are you philosophizing because it makes you feel good to think this way, right? So there are the ones, right, that are actually trying to get to the truth, and it's actually very hard to understand. And then there are those like Descartes, like Leibniz, like Newton. I don't want to throw Spinoza in that camp, right? He's definitely, all the Protestants are going to get thrown in there, right? Like theologian types. But yeah, they're just philosophizing because it pleases their sentiment, right? And so this takes us to question 2, right? So why has easy philosophy found more fame than other? Why do you so he's going to call this Cartesian philosophy easy. And it's easy because it's easy on our sentiments. It's easy about how we feel. Hume says that it's easy to believe all this really good stuff about us. Yeah. So, right, this easy philosophy is Cartesian, this sort of Newtonian philosophy, right? He thinks this is birthed just to make ourselves feel good. That this notion of knowledge through proof is going to be Yeah, it's going to be like a cognitive self-service, right? So 3, he says, why is being a mere philosopher not well thought of in the world, and what is still worse than that? So he says, okay, all this stuff's going to be really hard, and that once we're done doing all this really rigorous philosophy, right? A lot of people are going to say, what? Why did it matter? Why is you looking to map out the limits of what humans can know? Why is that going to be worth anything when it doesn't produce anything material?
For Hume, right?
No, for people. So like the answer to this question, well, how do we know what we know? Or the question, how do we acquire knowledge? It's not going to immediately start producing iPhones. It's not going to start producing motorized vehicles, right? In fact, this question is actually going to disrupt the unity of our sciences entirely. What's the point, right? People are going to say, well, I mean, it's not worth it to do philosophy because, well, it just doesn't give you anything material. It doesn't produce a good, right? Remember, we're on the cusp of an industrial age at this point. What industry does it provide? Nothing. But David Hume says, okay, well, what's worse than that? What's worse than just being a mere philosopher? He's going to say, well, being an ignoramus, being a dumbass. Okay, that's fine, right? It's hard, it's annoying, right? It may make you feel really uncomfortable to get to the truth, but it's better to be miserable, right, than to be a dumbass. Yeah. Okay. You guys may or may not believe in that, right? Remember, I don't tell you guys what to believe. Yeah. Um, I may disagree with that. So, 4, starting at, but this obscurity in the profound, where does a large part of metaphysics arise? And who is using metaphysical brambles to protect their weaknesses? So, reminder, we spoke on the nature of metaphysics on our first class. God and the existence of abstract entities like math and stuff are metaphysical topics, right? So, all this obscure talk about the nature of the world and existence of God, he's going to call this metaphysical BS. It's all metaphysical BS. And that it's done so guys like Descartes, Leibniz, right? Most of the members of the church, it's done to hide the weakness in their heart. That so like remember that panic the church was having because our new science was actually like it seemed to contradict everything we thought about ourselves. He's going to say this rationalizing around this phenomena that Descartes gives us and Leibniz gives us. This is actually done just to shield ourselves from the disappointment that it's just weakness. Yeah. We're going to read a little bit more of this with Nietzsche in next little bit of time. Okay. So number 5. So this is a question with notes, right? The answer is probably in here, right? Especially when I say huge hit. Hume is attacking a way of doing philosophy that pleases our sentiments and biases, that also aims to justify what we already thought instead of genuinely describing the world in which we live. He explains that curiosity, hope, and despair drive us into doing metaphysics this way. So think of Descartes' goals and the meditations in Socrates' Meno. Yet, accurate and valid reasoning is the only universal remedy for abstruse philosophy and metaphysical jargon. Yeah. So only when we think correctly can we fight these people like Descartes and Socrates off. Okay. So he says, yeah, so my question here is, what is that mental geography he refers to? And how will this aid in our universal remedy? If you look at the huge hint, it's essentially the answer. If we understand the limits of our mind, will it help us understand which things we actually know? We can actually know. So what Hume is going to do is she's going to do something a little bit like Descartes in the Meditations. He's going to try to find so this is like a person, big ass nose. Let's give him some blackheads. All right. Let's say this is his mind. He's going to find out the limits of all the things that can fit inside the mind so we can know the limits of what the mind can know. Okay, I'll say that again. We're going to find out the limits of what the mind can contain so that we know what the limits of what the mind can know. Sorry, that's a little confusing. Yeah. He calls this geography, right? So we're like mapping out what's possible for the mind to know. And he's going to start this by mapping out, well, what kind of ideas can actually be inside the mind. So what we know is going to be confined to, well, what ideas we can have. Yeah? Okay. So this is that mental geography. This is really important. This is really important for the midterm. This idea of mental geography. All right, I'm trying to wonder if I should spend more time on it or not. Okay, I'll just move on. So Hume asks, if these reasonings concerning human nature seem abstract and hard to understand, what of it? What does this question mean and how does he answer it? Well, here's a huge hint. He is warning us, and this is the answer. He is warning us that what follows will be counterintuitive and hard to understand, but worth the confusion and mental work. He also urges us not to be ignorant in the face of understanding. Yeah. So what's going to be next to understand in section 2 is going to be, well, in the whole inquiry, it's going to be really hard to understand. But just because it's hard to understand doesn't mean that, one, it's wrong, and doesn't mean that you shouldn't spend your time to get to the truth. Yeah. So it's a little kind of like an existential claim at the end. Yeah. All right. So let's jump to section 2. This is where it does get really freaking hard, and in my opinion, this is the hardest part of the class. Yeah. So, number 7, on the origin of ideas. So Hume states, the most lively thought is still dimmer than the dullest sensation. Then he comes up with 2 mind perceptions based on their liveliness, ideas and impressions. So keep this, or explain this distinction. Yeah, keep it short. So the difference between an idea and an impression. So these are going to be, right, these are going to be what the mind is limited to in terms of what it perceives. So the mind is going to be perceiving impressions, and then it's going to be perceiving ideas. So Eddie, how would you, right, without reading the inquiry, how would you describe what an impression is?
Something that you've experienced, like a
Yes.
impression.
Yes.
Something you've experienced.
Something you've experienced. Why is it called an impression?
Because they imprint.
Yes. So 100%. Okay, so here is Eddie. He's smiling, he's happy. Right. Okay, this is high school Eddie. This is Eddie that should have probably gone to jail. All right, there we go. That's badass Eddie. So Eddie's walking around the world. So here's his mind. And then here's the world. Yeah. Impressions, these are the things in the world that Eddie experiences. This is all of our forensic experience. So like you guys are watching this video. This video is imprinting itself onto your mind. Okay? The video you're watching is a part of the world, and all the sensations that come with it are imprinting themselves on your mind. Okay? And then there are ideas. And ideas are what David Hume is going to call, they're copies of the impressions. Okay? So here is Eddie or Freddie or whoever this guy is that's behind this laptop I'm recording on. This over here is Eddie having an impression of the world. So let's say he sees a square in the world or a box. Okay? Now, Eddie, from the impression of a box, Eddie forms the idea of a box. Yeah? And Eddie, Hume is going to describe one as more lively than the other.
So the impression of the idea is one.
Yeah, so which one?
For me, the impression.
Yes, the impression is 100% going to be much more lively.
Yeah.
And the
Although
idea...
over time, the idea could be more lively.
Yes. The idea is going to be more faint than the impression. The idea is just the copy of what you experience over here, the impression, the world imprinting itself on your mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's an example of why this is so, why he calls this more faint. Okay, so here's a marker. Okay, let's get something more. Okay, look at this piece of junk Freddie gave me. He should be freaking ashamed, right? I'm not grateful at all that I'm in his classroom. Okay, look at this eraser. Okay, you guys are having an impression of this eraser right now. Okay, absorb, focus on the impression. Okay, no more marker. All right, but you guys have the idea of the marker still being perceived in your mind. So you had an impression, and this was a perception you had. But now when you guys reflect on the marker, on the idea of the marker, oh, what did I say? A marker? Okay. We got a smart ass in class. Yeah. Now when you guys think about the idea of the eraser, you're still, yeah, it's all right. Pause. I'm just kidding. Yeah, you're still having a perception of the eraser, but it's going to be just a copy of the impression, and it's going to be faint. In fact, you guys watching right now, really try to perceive that idea.
How many holes did it have in the middle?
Yeah, how many crappy holes from Eddie's in-school suspension kids, right? How many holes did they put in the top of that eraser? Can you guys remember? Can you guys perceive the idea clear enough? Is the idea lively enough? Well, let's look back. Okay, if you guys exactly remembered what this looks like, then good for you. You're like superhuman, right? But yeah, I mean, I'm certain none of you guys did, right? Why? Because the idea is not as lively. Yeah. Okay. He's going to say that these are the only two mind perceptions that we have. You're right. So Eddie's eyebrows go down. Like, no, that's not true. Okay.
What about something you've never experienced before?
Exactly. Okay. What about something you never experienced before? What are you? This slave kid from the Mino? Yeah. So number 8. While our ideas seem limitless with what we can conceive, except, so in parentheses here, except what provides logical contradiction. So no one's going to imagine a square circle. right? Try it. I challenge you guys in the how to write a paper video. You can't, right? So any proof that comes up with this, we call it, logical contradictions. So you can't perceive a logical contradiction, but it seems like you can perceive anything else, right?
Yeah.
Or you can imagine anything else. Hume states all our ideas or more feeble perceptions are copies of impressions of more lively ones. So everything in the idea category
Has to come from experience.
has to come from experience.
So like a liger.
A liger, perfect example.
Never seen a liger.
You've never seen a liger, right? So maybe that goes, wow, right? The fact that I've never seen a liger, but I still have an image of a liger in my head, right?
Tiger.
Yeah, I mean, wow, my ideas must be limitless. Well, what's the problem with that example? Yeah, you're putting the most basic perception you have, and you're building compound ones, right? You're saying your most basic ideas, and you're building more compound ones here. So like,
think about all the art and stuff people.
right.
Or like a dragon. Who would have ever came up with a dragon?
Yes, but Descartes already kind of addressed this accidentally. Yeah, he kind of like sprung his own trap a little bit, right? That all our paintings are just copies of the real world. Yes,
Komodo dragon or something?
yes. So let's get to that. So, right, Descartes is going to say that Hume is going to take the example of like a golden mountain. So here's a mountain. It looks like crap, right? Here we go. And let's picture this thing. Picture this red is actually gold. Oh my God.
That's an old market.
We should throw these away. I've never seen a gold mountain, so maybe this idea that all ideas are just copies of impression is BS. Well, he's going to say that these are basic ideas or simple ideas that you put together to make the more compound ones. Yeah? And then boom. Okay, we have a very apt explanation for why I think about things I've never seen. They all come from, stuff that, yeah, they can always be broken down into simpler and simpler ideas, yeah, that I have seen via impression. Okay, and so then he's going to offer us a little challenge here, right? He's going to dare you to come up with an idea that cannot be broken down in this way. Can you think of so right now, Eddie, can you imagine something? Can you come up with an idea that you can't trace the origin back to an impression? Like what? What about unicorn?
I just think of that movie, Despicable Me 3.
Yeah, okay, I didn't see it, but
The girl finds unicorn.
Okay.
Just my most recent impression.
Right, yes, an impression, right? You would think of a unicorn as what? Well, it's just a horse with a horn on its head. Yeah. Right? But come up with something really fantastic.
My child.
Huh?
My child.
Yeah, what does your child look like?
Brown.
Exactly. Well, what are you?
Brown.
You're brown. Right? And that your idea of the kid is really just a copy of the impressions you have of yourself. Right? Think of something.
God.
Okay, now what is it like to imagine God?
Hard.
Yes, okay, yes. Now really, put an image to God. What image you come up with?
Light.
Yeah, but where's light from?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've seen light before. Really, meet this challenge, because if you can't do it, then we're in trouble. If you can't do this, so we are really going to be in trouble here.
I'm sure there is, but just because you can't prove something doesn't mean it's not real.
Oh no, 100%. But just because the whole point is just because you're going to prove something doesn't mean you're saying anything of sense. Doesn't mean you're making sense. That the impression that the fact that the ideas seem to be dependent on what you've already seen is actually going to take a fat crack against
Rationalism.
rationalism. Is going to have to go out the window.
Have to?
It's going to have to, and science is going to go with it.
Good job, you.
Yeah, the way to go, Hume. You're a real piece of
Real
work.
Mitch.
Yeah, you're a real cool guy. Okay, yeah. So think about an idea that it doesn't correspond to something you've seen. It's gonna be almost impossible. I mean, I'm waiting for something.
I'm thinking of space.
Space, but again, right?
Something in space.
Something in space.
But I can't even.
Yeah, you can't even conceive. The imagination seems to be limited to experience. Okay, so following Hume's arguments from question 8, he gives a test for metaphysical ideas in which we ask, from what impression is that supposed idea derived?
I mean, but you can go backwards to go forwards.
Yeah, so explain
So,
that.
like, nobody ever imagined a phone.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right.
There was no blueprint for it.
Right, but we understood. I mean, if you look at like scientific progress, like I mean, this is still like it's still like
Imprints from.
it's. I mean, it's not like a new sensation came about. I mean, you're still referring to communication, right?
So there's certain things that just don't change.
It's not that they don't change. It's that there's certain things that
That are foundational.
there's certain things that I mean everything according to Hume, right? So I may or may not be Humean, right? I'm going to pretend to be Hume right now. There's nothing that originates from the mind itself that makes sense from this world.
From this world.
Anything that has to do with this world comes from what we see.
Okay.
All the content about our world that we have in our head comes from the world.
So if you brought a blind person, you told them to draw what a dog
Yes,
looks
yes. So this is going to be his 100% one of his arguments. He's going to ask you, okay, well, he's going to ask a blind guy to describe the color between, let's say blue and green, right? Try to describe what redness is to someone that's born blind. Try to describe it. How would you do that? How would you describe what it is to be red to a blind person? You'd be at a loss of words. Why? Because there's nothing more simple in the idea than that. It can't be broken down so the blind person can build it back up. Why? Because this is the simplicity.
Cool.
Well, I mean, not cool because this isn't good. We don't want this. Like, think of where we were like before this.
Yeah.
We were doing good, you know? This is a problem. It's
He's a contrarian.
Well, I mean, he may be telling the truth, you know. So, I mean, regardless of what Hume is, like, if this is true, then this is not like something that we hope for, right? Because knowledge in general knowledge of the world is gonna be impossible, right? At least knowledge in this realist way is gonna be impossible. Okay, so David Hume is gonna ask this question, right? From what impression is that supposed idea derived when referring to metaphysical ideas? What is this test meant to prove? Okay, so here's a hint. So before this test, he explains that we use nonsensical words and ideas all the time and take them to actually mean something only because we habitually use them. Yeah. So he's gonna give us a test, right? Since Hume has done what a great bulk of people are going to come to kind of accept for a time, that all ideas are limited to what you see, we are going to have a test, a metaphysical test, or a test for when we want to posit metaphysical ideas.
Mhm.
And it's going to be a nonsense test. So how do you know if what you're referring to metaphysically is nonsense or not? And the test is going to be, well, from what impression is it derived from? And if you don't come up with an impression, then it must be complete nonsense.
Say that again.
So if you posit some metaphysical entity, like, let's say God, okay?
Uh-huh.
And I ask you, okay, from what impression is God derived?
What if he said man?
Exactly. Well, man is not God, right?
Yeah.
That all our ideas of God are actually nonsense because they don't come from anything that can give us a clear idea. So David Hume is not arguing that God doesn't exist. He's saying that ideas like God are outside the boundaries of us knowing. Why? Because we can't have impressions of him.
So he can't have an impression of something, can he? It's not,
If you can't have an impression, then you can't have a real idea of what you're talking about, because all our ideas come from God. I mean, all our ideas come from impressions. God's going to be in that category, right? Numbers are going to be in this category. Yeah. The way the world is, tomorrow is going to be in this category. Yeah. These are all metaphysical claims. Ideas like time and space, all this other stuff. Yeah. Wait, 10 minutes? Okay. All right, guys, we're going to speed through this. So, no, don't be sorry. So 9, following Hume's arguments from question 8. Oh, yeah, we already did this. Okay, so here 10 is not a question. So at the end of section 2, at the end of section 2, Hume refers to a group of philosophers that have come before him. Guys like John Locke, George Berkeley, right? The rest of what we would call the British empiricist. And he says that this idea that all knowledge about the world, if there is knowledge to be had, all sensible ideas, I should say, I'll tailor that back a little bit. All sensible ideas come from experience alone. That the way he's saying it is actually the way that they were trying to talk about it, but they were missing the point. So John Locke was missing the point. George Berkeley was kind of missing the point, or at least they weren't saying it efficiently enough, right? So given that all things that can be known must come through observation, and we now have a metaphysical jargon test that tells you what's nonsense and what isn't, then we're kind of we're in a bit of trouble when it comes to all this new science stuff. And so this takes us to number 3, section 3, right? So this is a question with notes. Hume recognizes that the ideas in our mind seem to follow systematic ways of fitting together, despite the fact that they can only come from experience. Our languages, for example, seem to have the same type of structure across all mankind, right? So we seem to structure our language, right? Always with a subject and a predicate, regardless of what language you're operating in. So the way in which we go from simple impressions and we combine them to make compound ideas, there seems to be a universal pattern in which we do that. Okay. He states this. This is conclusive evidence that the simple ideas of compound ones are made up, were linked by some universal factor that has equal influence on all mankind. So what are the three ways that we, mankind, connect simple ideas to create compound ones? So the way we go from simple ideas to compound ones is through three ways. These three ways are going to be cause and effect, continuity, and resemblance. These are the three ways that we combine simple ideas and make compound ones. Okay, now this is huge, right? So resemblance, continuity, and cause and effect. Hume is making the case that these are not objective features of the world. These ideas, cause and effect, which is where one thing seems to cause another thing, right? This is not an objective feature in the world. We don't observe cause and effect. We only observe a bunch of effects, right? And we'll get more into this later. Continuity, where I am a continued object through space, right? This is also not a matter of, this is also not a matter of objectivity. And the same thing with resemblance, where me and Eddie both look the same, right? We both look like people. We actually don't look anything alike, but we both look like people, right? And this idea of being a person is going to be a matter of, right, resemblance, but this is not an objective feature of the world. This is just how my psyche makes sense of all my simple ideas. Cause and effect is not real. Continuity is not real. And resemblance is not real, right? And we got to get, that's pretty much, that's all we're reading. So I will be giving, I guess, another lecture on Hume. Probably Friday, right? So maybe I'll cut some reading out for this week while you guys do midterms. To kind of make sense of this, let me leave you guys with a little anecdote. If I go to hit my head on the wall, well, let's say I'm driving and I get into a car accident and I hit my head on the window. Everything in my mind, everything in my brain can be totally fine. But there's one part inside my brain that if I mess up, I'll function completely normal. I'll function normally, except I won't be able to perceive faces anymore. So I'll see everything the way I see it now, but I won't be able to recognize faces. So if I hurt this piece of my brain, I can't put a nose with two eyes and lips. I can't make sense of it. Doesn't this make it seem like that faces are not objective features of the world, but instead they're just the way we make sense of the world? faces are mind dependent, not objective dependent. They're not objective. Yeah. Cause and effect. It's going to be the same thing. So is resemblance. In section 4, which I didn't have us read, cause and effect is the one he goes after the most because he's dealing with this new science, right? And this new science is based off of an idea of cause and effect between a grip of particles, right? Cause and effect is also going to be a product of the mind, not a product of reality. Yeah, we'll get more to that. We'll get more to that by the end of the week, probably. All right, guys.